Yeah, I think so. Let's, people are spending their time. You all showed up. Let's go.
All right.
So,
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy days to join us. If you haven't met me, I'm Krista. I'm the newest training coordinator on the Child Welfare Training Partnership team. And I'm very excited to introduce Bob Friend and this Family Finding Microlearning series to you. So first off, you might have noticed that this microlearning is being recorded, which is a great thing because it means that this learning can be made available to those of us who weren't able to attend today in person. And it means that in addition to our screens being recorded, the chat box will be recorded as well. And that includes private messages, just something to be thoughtful of. This Family Finding series is actually broken into 3 sections, each building upon the last. So the first section is today's session, which will focus on the process and the skill of discovering and engaging family members. And then the second session, next week's microlearning, will focus on the skills needed to facilitate a meeting with those discovered family members and how to support families in a way that is manageable for you as workers as those complicated dynamics are uncovered that all families have. And the third session will focus on what comes after that initial meeting, what it takes to sustain family networks once they've been established. So without further ado, you probably remember Bob from the family finding trainings over this summer, but if you weren't able to attend those, Bob is the director of the National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness, and we are luckily able to have another opportunity to learn from Bob's many, many years of experience supporting families and establishing lifelong networks and in supporting agencies in developing family finding practices. So thanks for being here, Bob.
thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't presume to have, just because I'm old, I don't presume to have all the information that's, and all the skills. I think, as a combination, we can create a great learning environment over the course of these 3 sessions. So part of what I want to do is share some things that we've developed, that I've learned, that I've seen work in other places, but I also want to encourage sharing amongst each other, because I think you guys as a collective are pretty skilled, and maybe not everyone knows what you all do, what each of you do. And we, obviously in an hour time with 60 people or so, we're not going to be able to get into all the detail of that, but we're going to set up some activities and exercises and breakouts for you to get to know each other a little bit, be able to share some of your practices as well as to try out some of the things that I'll be suggesting. So that's sort of the overarching style of these 3 micro series. It's not like me lecturing at you for an hour each time, which I think is boring. So without any further ado, let me share my screen and pull up the micro learning PowerPoint. Let's take a minute to get into presenter mode. And there we go. Okay. So what we're really focused on for this first session is not only focusing on discovery, but just in the very early stages, like first 72 hours. What are the things that you do? What's working? What are some of the things you could be doing? What could you be doing better? What are you missing? What are your gaps? Those sorts of things. And I'm going to fill in with some practices that we use and others that we have worked with use in those times. I'm sure some of them you already do, and there may be some things that we haven't identified that you do that you can share with each other. So Krista's going to launch a quick poll.
Can everyone see that? Thumbs up. Perfect. Thanks for nodding.
Yeah. If y'all can fill out the poll, that'd be great. About half folks.
Can I ask a clarifier? Is 1 like, yeah, we believe it, or like 10 is absolutely, 1 is meh, not so much?
The low is the 1, the 2 is no, And the 9 and the 10 is absolutely consistently all the time. So we'll give it about 5 more seconds. Almost everyone's in. Okay. All right. So from just looking at the reports, over half of you think that it's 100% of the time. Another quarter of you think it's almost 100% of the time, and then another tenth of you thinks it's almost 100% of the time. So it's like sort of 8, 9, and 10 are the tops of the polls. There's a 2 here, which maybe that's an outlier, or maybe there's somebody that doesn't think that's a good idea. So either way, that's okay. Just
Yeah, she made a mistake. She put it in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Can't see the chat when I'm up full screen, so I have to trust you all to fill me in if there's something that's getting chatted about. All right, so generally, folks think it's a really good idea to build a team of natural supports to make decisions about the lives of youth. And when I say about the lives of youth, it includes the youth as part of the team. Now, if they're 1 or 2, they probably don't have a lot to say. So then it's more about from a third person perspective. But otherwise, young people should be part of the team in some aspect or another. Developmentally, how do they fit? And my default is that they should be included unless they demonstrate that they can't be. And maybe included in some ways and not in others, depending upon the nature of the conversations or whatever. But that's the idea. So, okay, let's close the poll. And we'll go on to the next slide. So kind of as an overview, I did a little bit of that earlier, but I wanted to kind of start from a place around if we get a consensus generally about where we are, or at least we're clear about where we are on that continuum of whether or not we build natural support networks. Where do you go from getting a sense of that, both for yourselves, for your coworkers and partners, and from families? And that it's a great way to be able to kind of get an idea. It's not so much about what the score is, but it's a way to build from that to get a sense of what people are concerned about or what they value, right? Because if you connect with people around their values, it's just this natural bond and link. And it's often not the best way to approach that about an open-ended question about, tell me about your values. It's like, how do you get in and then create a conversation in which we're learning about what people value and consider to be important? Because a lot of times we interpret behavior from values that we have. And I think that gets us in trouble. And to understand how those behaviors are situated into the principles and values of others gives us more context to understand the behavior. And I think creates less room for us to interpret via our own lens, which involves all of our biases and our previous experiences, what that means to us. So it's more, again, how do we situate ourselves to understand where others are coming from? So I building from that, do you think it's a good idea to build a team of natural supports? It's like, how do we approach parents and other family members to get a sense of how open or guarded they are? Do you know where your partners land? Do you have an elevator pitch in simple language down to why you believe it's important? So if folks say, well, tell me more about that, or I'm not sure I'm okay with that. And you say, well, and you could respond with, I think it's a good idea because, do you have a quick elevator pitch? And I'm going to ask someone in a minute to step forward and volunteer for bonus points. And Krista's keeping score of the bonus points. For all it matters, to be able to share an elevator pitch, and you'll all practice this. That'll be one of the practice things we'll have later in the hour. But I think it's really important to be able to say with natural language that families understand, why that's important. And so I want to give opportunity for someone to air. So think about that while we're talking about it. So no matter where people land, you can be curious and say, let's say somebody was a 7. Oh, well, that's interesting. Tell me why you're a 7 and not a 6. What about your beliefs lead you to rate yourself at a 7? What's important to you that you consider yourself as a 7? Why do you think it's important to build a good why it's a good idea to build a team of natural supports? And then you can explore those sorts of questions. And then also on the other end of it, say, well, what concerns limit you from being an 8, right? And how can we make sure we address those concerns? Well, there's a certain person I'm not really sure about, or I want to make sure that I don't lose my own power in making some of those decisions, or if there's certain people, it's not any of their business, or whatever it is. And then say, so you can then explore, we'll have a little bit of conversation about that, where that can take you and some questions. But the idea is that opens a dialogue. It's not so much to say, okay, that there are 7, okay, there are 5, because we have done this in other venues where people are actually scoring, and then what they find is that they're, especially around with their professional partners, people will say they're in one place. So let's say there's a private partner that's doing the work and they're working with a public entity. The public entity would say, yes, I'm all in. I'm a 7, I'm an 8, I'm a 9, I'm a 10. But then when you get to do the work, it comes down to, yeah, but not here and not there and not in this instance and whatever. And it slows everything down, and sometimes grinds to a halt. And so it's not so much about, well, what did they say? What number did they have? But the conversations to explore so you can address some of those things in advance. And I think that's one of the ways the alignment stuff is trying to push itself forward. Because those of you that were in the other trainings that I've done, the alignment thing is really it. Like if you can't get on the same page around these just basic ideas, you can work your butt off. And it doesn't quite gel or get traction, because there's too many forces that are depleting while others are adding. It's hard to fill up a cup if there's a hole in the bottom, right? So what are the questions that you use? I'm going to invite you to just chat in a few for a minute. What questions do you use, and is there somebody that could share their elevator pitch about why forming a natural support network would be important? So I'm going to go off of presenter mode, so that I can see y'all a little bit, and I can see the chat. So who'd like to share a quick elevator pitch? Again, Krista's keeping track of bonus points. Come on, you guys do this all the time. Those of you that are doing this work, you're doing it all the time. You're talking about why it's important to gather. Just jump out.
I just did my first family find ever. And what I said, and it seemed to work pretty well, people were pretty responsive to it, was research shows that when children are not living with their parents and they're living with other family members or even foster families who aren't part of their blood relatives, that it's very, very important to have connections with other family members to surround them and help them feel supported.
And how did that go, Christine, when you shared that?
It went really well with everybody. People were like, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
And
great.
Yeah. And then, and then they would say, and then I would say, and there are various levels of support. Nobody is asking you to do anything that you wouldn't feel comfortable doing. It's really about learning what your connection has been, mm-hmm. and what your connection is now, mm-hmm. and what your connection could be in the future based on your comfort level.
Yeah, because it's about not only who loves, but who could love. And sometimes that's a piece that we miss. It's both those things. So beautiful. First time out of the box. Nice.
Thank you.
Kudos to whoever was helping you on that. Or if you just picked it up all on your own, double kudos to you and extra bonus points. Ding,
Oh, my
ding.
supervisor's awesome.
All right, shout out to your supervisor. Who's your supervisor?
Jennifer Baker. She's
Okay,
new
Jennifer
too.
Baker. Woo! All right, one more. Who's got another elevator pitch? That was great. See, you get lots of kudos here when you share.
And if you'd like to put anything in the chat, I'm happy to read it out too, if you'd rather not
Sure.
verbally share right now.
It says folks are muted. They're allowed to unmute themselves, aren't they, Krista? Or do you have complete
Should be able
control?
to. Peggy, do you know how to unmute yourself? You can hold down the space bar if you'd like to do it that way, or you can click the far left mute button.
Yep. All right, doesn't look like I'm gonna get somebody to do it, and I don't want to stay in this place too much longer, so.
Oh, we just had one in the chat, Bob.
Oh,
And there's a question. Are we talking about why wraparound support is important?
yeah, why a network of support? Yeah. So sometimes wraparound is a short-term intervention that goes away, and it's more sort of professional based. It depends upon where you are, who you are, why you are, all that kind of thing. But the concept is correct around how do we make sure that there's a team around you, and ultimately for WRAP to work, WRAP focuses on creating the team so that the professionals who are providing the support no longer need to do it. And sometimes we get stuck in sort of the rescue mode about, well, we're essential in helping these families because without us, blah, blah, blah. And of course, we'll never be there forever.
Perfect. And Maggie wrote in the chat, I have CF cases and make the same pitch. And it sounds like the same pitch as Christine. Studies show that children do best in these cases are most successful with strong family involvement.
Yeah.
And Maggie also added that family and other natural and informal supports, fictive kin, et cetera.
Right. It's really important to get at how do people define family, not how we define family, to remove ourselves from our own cognitive set about what does family mean to us. Because I could ask each of you how big your family is. You could have identical size family from one perspective, and you may all each have a different number. And I know you don't all have the same size family because that's not the case. But generally, when folks ask family, and they have this very wide, inclusive family in the United States, it's around 150 people are identified in family. Okay, and I think one of the interesting things that because they have a broad understanding and inclusive understanding of family, I think one of the interesting pieces of work that I don't know how many of you have heard of 30 Days to Family, but there's different versions of that operating in a few jurisdictions. And I'm really familiar with the folks in Ohio that have been doing it. I've been helping a little bit here and there with their installation. And one of the things that they found is that within 30 days, and they are only operating with at the most 2 families per worker. So it's a very intensive process. But within 30 days, they're averaging around 200 connections identified. So it's not like we can't find people. Now, there's an intensity and a time factor, right? And then to what end? All those questions are fair. But, from 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was a belief that there weren't family. If they were, they would have shown up already. That myth is busted. That's gone. It's like there are plenty of family and they sometimes just don't know. And I think as we'll get into, the dad side of that equation is really important as well. So Krista, I know we have another poll. Why don't I load back up the PowerPoint and
All right, can everyone see that? Great.
Okay, almost everyone's in. It looks like the two highest sets are between 3 to 8 and 8 to 15. That's sort of the bell curve that's there. So that's about 80% of the interest. And I would say generally somewhere, if I grouped it differently and I said somewhere 7 to 12, that's where people generally end up with thinking it's the best idea. Now I know there are working with some families and some tribal families that they had more than 40 and they had wonderful meetings. You have to be a good facilitator and you have to understand the customs and how to share and all those sorts of things. I think that's really critical. But generally the ideal is to try to get it around a dozen if you can, or close to a dozen folks in the room. Now, if you're at some folks were getting stuck in the beginning. If you're at 9, I'm not ready to have a meeting. Well, if you're doing good discovery work on both ends and you're getting on both mom's side and dad's side, and you're getting folks into the room, then part of your work can be who else needs to be here and to involve them to continue to broaden the network. And that really should be a question every time you meet. Who are we missing? Who else needs to be here to help them identify their strategies? So a lot of times we think it's only ours as the worker or the family finder to do that work. And it's really, that's the purpose of the network, is to help them ultimately meet their own needs. And so the more you can ask the network to meet its own needs, the more likely that they will. When you never ask the network that, then they're not likely to do that. It doesn't encourage or support them to do it. All right, so let's I'll clear the poll.
And Bob, we have 2 comments that were in the chat as well.
Oh, please, yeah. Go ahead.
Lisa just made the point that if reunification is the case plan goal, natural supports can continue after DCF is out of the picture if they know the situation and goals. And Penny also wanted to point out that research shows that children whose families are involved have a higher rate of success and feel connected. Children deserve to know and be a part of their family network. If reunification occurs, then that identified family can continue to offer support and connections.
Yeah, the research is also showing that kids do much better even in adoptive settings where birth families involved. There are certain circumstances where there's protection and safety, and that's not a good idea. So I'm not saying all the time and always, but there's so many adoption disruptions and dissolutions that occur because we get into the loyalty stuff, and the adoptive family doesn't want to allow any contact with siblings or parents or any other birth family members. And young people are gonna, when they're 16, 17, 18, they're just gonna find them. And I used to talk about this 10, 15 years ago, and that's before this thing happened, where you can find somebody in a hot second. And so now it's really a lost cause to put a line in the sand about how other people want to be seen and who they want to be part of. And it's, ultimately it's a losing battle. And if you can align with how do people keep themselves safe in those kind of experiences, again, there's the way out of kind of off the scale danger stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about, for many folks, it's because it's a loyalty thing. Well, I've raised you, not them, and all this kind of stuff. They're curious. It happens all the time. And helping them fulfill that curiosity in a place where they can still be loved and belong. They can belong to more than one set of people. And that's a really important thing from an identity perspective. So I think, that's a growing piece of practice. There's some places that's the only work they'll do. And there's other ones that are still thinking about the primary way of going forward is closed adoption. And I would offer that, there's different ways to think about it. So I said I was going to load up the PowerPoint. Let me do that.
Can I share an example of what you were just talking about while that's
Yes.
loading? So again, my first family find-in, the child is living with his maternal grandmother. And so I had to go do family finding on the paternal side. And she was really scared about it. Like, she was like, no, we don't want those people involved, you know, and we did a lot of planning on the front end before I made any phone calls about how she was going to handle it. And she had like all these legal questions about, well, what if they try to take him, that I had to bring back to DCF and get the answers to. It was like a lot of planning before I ever started even making the phone calls. And then sure enough, as soon as I reached out to the first person, grandma Instagrammed the child the next day. And so it began. And but we had front loaded it, you know, with all the planning and how to respond. So it went really well. But if I hadn't done that, it probably would have been a mess.
Yes. Yes. Well, and thinking forward, like if young people are coming into care right now, if we build a network and whatever the decisions are, whether they're reunification, because that was discussed, whether it's going to be some kind of adoption or living with another relative, or guardianship, whatever it is, the team can come together and sanction it and provide support and figure out how to maintain contact and whatever. It's much easier to do it that way and build from that network than it is to just place with an adoptive family and then try to get the adoptive family to embrace the birth family. It's like, no, that's why you start with bringing everyone to the table and then figuring out and having the team figure out what's best, right? And that helps build the relationships because you work through stuff and there's always wrinkles and hurdles and you know, stumbles and all those sorts of things. But you know, the more you can do that in advance, the less likely you have of having those difficult conversations. So I'm going to give this a quick shot. I'm going to see if I can spend like 4 or 5 minutes on it and ask you all to identify if in the first 72 hours of the work that you're doing, where you're getting a referral and you're starting to understand what's happened and to build a network, do your discovery, what's done and who does it. Christy, are you able to type into the slide? You might not be able to. I don't think I'm able to here if it's yeah, I can't if it's in presentation mode, but that's something that we can pull together and get back out to you. So just kind of shout out what gets done in the first 72 hours. Where do you start and who does it?
As a worker, I meet with the child as soon as possible to do a genogram and an EcoMap.
Do you use a particular tool to do a genogram and an EcoMap, or are you constructing it on paper? How does that work?
I usually draw it on paper, but I know people prefer to use some online tools too.
Okay, and how do you get that back into the files after you've drawn it on paper? Do you scan it
Yep.
so it's electronically? Do you just insert it into the case file in paper?
I use both. I'll scan it in so that it's in the computer, but I also put it in the case file.
Well, I appreciate that you can do something that's legible and insert it in there, because if it was me and I wrote something up, people would be saying, Bob, what is this? So we all have our gifts. That's not one of mine. All right, so you meet with a young person, you begin the process of genogram and EcoMap. They don't know all of the family background, unlikely. So, or you have a very young child who doesn't know very much of it, right? So then what?
Bob, in the chat, Kelly made the point that LexisNexis is also done with the resource coordinators.
Okay.
And there's a question of how do you do a genogram with a small child? And there's another idea. We use GenoPro to build and print a genogram if we aren't using a hand-drawn genogram.
Yep.
And the other suggestion that came up is you can ask who comes for birthdays or holidays. A lot of good points made in the chat right now.
Okay. So you're meeting with the young person, right? That now, when we start meeting with parents or with other family members, or how quickly does that happen and who does it?
I'll typically call the mother or father right away.
Right
I
away.
can't say it's within the first day, but that's where we start in our office, is with mother, father.
Okay.
Do the genogram and, if possible, an EcoMap with mom or dad.
And
And
Greg, what percentage of the time would you say that they are amenable to identifying who's in their family? Just based on a referral,
around here, it's usually a 50-50 shot.
50-50. And what seems to tip the scales? What ways do you guys use that's helpful to work through and be able to get the information? Because I'm sure there's some reticence at first, right?
Yeah, they don't think that the family really, they have any connection with family. Um, Honestly, the way I usually get names is just to tell them that I'm required by law to call these people and contact them.
Uh-huh.
That's usually the only way I get to tip the scale.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Trying to explain research and stuff like that for the families I've run into. It goes in one ear and out the other. It really is just like, well, I kind of have to. What it doesn't mean you have to have contact with them afterwards, but
Yeah.
I've got to let DCF know about these people.
Okay. Yep.
And then I'll reach out to my lovely Tanya and let her do the LexisNexis
Okay.
thing for me.
So you reach out to Tanya. Tanya does the LexisNexis. How quickly you guys get that back?
Oh, Tanya usually gets it within a couple hours.
Couple hours. You get it back in a couple hours, and you read the LexisNexis, and it has on average how many contacts? Just making it up.
5 to 8 usually.
5 to 8. Okay.
Yeah.
So then,
Unfortunately, sometimes they don't come with phone numbers, so then I'll reach back out to the parents to see if they can help with that.
okay.
And again, sometimes they're very reluctant to provide that, and sometimes they flat out refuse.
Sure. So what do you do once they refuse? If they-
Well, pre-COVID, I would go over to DCF and look through the file and see if I could find that name.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I might ask DCF workers if they have any recognition of that name. And yeah, that's the best way I can do it.
Okay.
I always
Thanks.
thought when I was doing an eco map or a genogram that it was how you asked. It wasn't, do you
Yeah.
have any siblings? It's
Yeah.
who are your siblings? Tell me about your parents. Who are your parents' siblings? Who are your grandparents? So you just assume that there's family. You don't give the opportunity for them to not include family.
Yeah. And you find that you get a better response that way, Susan? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. What else? What other tricks do people do? First 72 hours, like what are the first things you're doing and what are you trying to get to? What would you like your outcome to be?
There's a research suggestion in the chat, Bob. TruePeopleSearch.com is also a great site for contact info. So thanks
Yep.
very much, Sarah, for sharing that.
Yep. Do folks have access to social media searches? Are you able to launch that from either Easter Seals or the other private providers or from the department?
I think that there's been some questions of like how ethical that is in
Really?
terms of us. I mean, I don't know the answer. But I feel like we've kind of been rebuffed a little bit around doing that and looking people up on social media, especially because we don't have specific agency social media accounts.
Uh-huh.
We wouldn't want staff doing it from personal accounts.
Right.
So I think that it's something that I don't know. I mean, from my point of view, I don't think it's widely used, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. It really does depend on jurisdiction, and there are a few jurisdictions that do struggle with some of the perceived ethics around it. And there are others where it's standard operating procedure and the organization has an account and they reach out to folks. Nobody friends anybody or shares any personal information or any of that kind of stuff, but it's a way to connect and to find. Seneca runs its own search service that we contract with folks in like 50 or 60 sites nationally. And part of what we offer is Facebook and sometimes LinkedIn or there used to be more MySpace traffic. Now there's not so much of that. Occasionally there's something, but part of our reports are built off of not only a series of data sites, but also social media, and we get reports back to folks with that kind of information. So yeah, I mean, it's very dependent upon the organization, and sometimes it has to be talked through, but it's actually in the legislation. So you certainly have a legal ground to do it. Whether you feel comfortable, that's another matter.
Bob, there's a few more points made in the chat.
Sure.
Someone just
Got the
referenced,
reference.
thank you,
Go ahead.
Emily, that in 2017, the NASW, which if you're not familiar with that, is the National Social Work Agency, guidelines suggest avoiding social media searches. So that's something
read
that's been
that.
out in the past.
I
And then someone else
attempted-
just referenced that in some districts, there is a Facebook and Messenger that is delegated for the use of making contact through social media.
Right.
And one more point, just a strategy that's been used. When parents have refused to provide information about family or supports, they have the conversation about reasons why. Are they ashamed of DCF involvement? Are they worried about what their family will think of them? What's the worst that could happen by DCF contacting their family, and try to connect through that avenue?
Yep. And that's exactly where it's like somebody's reading ahead to the PowerPoint. All right. So I just wanted to get a sense of what that quick process was of the first 72 hours, how you're spending your time, who's doing it, who's communicating with each other about it. I think Krista and I are going to work with 1 or 2 sites around actually doing this. And it'll probably be for a longer period of time than the first 72 hours. But there are sometimes folks aren't really sure what happens. Or they have, if you ask one person, they have a different perspective than another person. And they don't always see the intersections of how the information ends up building whatever decisions that end up happening and creating, family support networks. So this kind of an activity with the folks that you work with who are actually doing the work can be really helpful. And a lot of times you can use like 4x6 index cards and kind of chart it out. So what happens, who does it, who communicates it, who participates, at what point do you call a meeting, and who's involved. So if you're doing a safety planning meeting, how quickly does that happen? Who organizes it? Who facilitates it? Who communicates? Who are we including? Who are we missing out? So you can have all those sorts of conversations. All right, so I'll jump ahead. So I put just a few commonly used discovery tools up here, and there may be other ones that you all use that that you find helpful. I just want to put out that Locating Family Historian, which is kind of in the middle there.
Just so you know, sorry, Bob, to interrupt. We can't see the PowerPoint right now. It's not sharing yet.
Oh, really? I wonder why. When did it stop? Because I haven't changed it. All right, why don't I get out and I'll go back in. Can you see it now?
We can't see it. If it would be helpful, I can try to grab it also.
I'll go back to share screen and see.
While we're waiting, I came in a little late. I was just wondering, is there going to be a break, or should I go to the bathroom whenever I feel like it?
Yeah, we only have till the top of the hour, so I think you just have to exit when you exit, but we only have 1 hour, so I wasn't going to try and include a break.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 2 hours. Thank you.
No, just 1. I'd love to do 2, but I know we don't have the time. Anyway, you should be able to see that now, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So sorry, I wonder what I did. User error. Okay, so commonly discovered tools, and as I was saying, Locating the Family Historian is about halfway down on the map there, on the slide. And of all the things that, there's some things that you have to do and some things that get you to the information. But if there's anything that you can do to identify who knows everybody's business in the family, that's what you want to do. That's where the gold mine is, right? That's where all the majority of the information is locating that family historian. Now, a lot of these things help you to get there or identify safety, help you understand what's happened. I could throw also mobility maps in here, which is a good tool to use. It takes a little bit longer than I can teach in a mini in sort of a 1 hour lesson, but it's a helpful discovery tool. What else do you all do? So maybe you can just pop a couple of things in the chat. What other kind of discovery tools do you all use to find and ultimately engage people? Because there's, you know, a lot of times we've characterized discovery as being separate from engagement, and there's no such thing. As you're discovering people, you're engaging them, and as you're engaging them, you're finding out, who else should I talk to? It's like these things are so intertwined, and the most effective discovery happens with the most effective engagement. And the most effective engagement leads to the most effective discovery. Any stuff in the chat, Krista, for what else people use besides these common discovery tools?
One suggestion that just came up was file mining.
File mining. Yeah, I should have had that in there. Yep.
And another suggestion that just came up, thanks Beth, is review old intakes connected to the child and family if they exist, to see if there are others we didn't think of, and find through other methods.
Yeah. So in theory, that's a subset of the file mining, although it depends on how the files are stored and whether it's electronic or hard copy and who has access. And sometimes, especially when you have private agencies doing the work, contracting to do the work, how much access do they have? And as Greg pointed out before, with COVID, you know, then does that limit that? Anything else in the chat, Krista?
Yes, two more things just popped up. So reviewing past family safety planning meeting notes for genograms.
Right.
Thanks,
Again,
Natalie.
you think that's in the file mining? Yeah.
Stephanie just mentioned that she's located people through obituaries. It helps
Yeah.
to track family members and ensure you are looking at the right people.
Yep. There's lots of search tools like that. Public search tools, obits, those sorts of things. Absolutely.
We're getting a lot of great ideas now, actually. Sean just mentioned that there are several workers with many years of experience that have worked with the family in the past who remember family members or support. So some professional connection there. Brandon just mentioned using some of the databases that people have access to, VCAS and FSDNet databases. Amy just mentioned back to social media and cold calls. It's nice to know you can look someone up and see what they look like, that you then might know you could be on the right track.
Yeah. That's great. So, you know, again, be able to share these with each other helps identify what else can be done, because sometimes you get stuck with one or another, and what you don't want to do is end up getting stuck. You want to have different options and different ways of going when you run into a roadblock or something where you feel like stuff's not paying off, right? So I want to get to the dad's question. And Krista, you want to run that poll?
Yes. Can everyone see that new poll? Great.
Oh, the second one should be 25 to 50%. I think it's probably obvious, but
Are VCAS and FSDNet paid? Like, does the agency have to subscribe to them and pay for them, or you can just use them?
as an internal agency question, I can't answer that one.
Oh,
I think it's just DCF who has access to that.
okay.
It looks like from the majority of the response, about a quarter to a half of the time, and then the second largest response is less, a quarter or less of the time. So only 2 people out of, I don't know, 60, 64, however many response, so 51, 57. So 2 out of 57 said that between over 75% of the time is an equal share of dad's family with moms, which, you know, that's not unusual, right? That's a problem that child welfare generally faces. And so I have a bunch of questions that I loaded into the PowerPoint for us to have a breakout. It's evident from it's 10:48 or 1:48 your time already. We're not going to get to a breakout, but I'm going to leave you with some questions to be talking about in your offices. And one of them is, what are some of your best practices in this regard, both personally and collectively? Like how do you best engage with dad and their families? How do you make sure you're spending equal time? Because they're required to be equally engaged with. There's no legal difference between mom and dad in terms of your due diligence and reasonable efforts. And what's one aspect of your engagement process you can improve on? How can we be better with dad so that we can get, if I ask this question in 6 months, could I see a shift in the responses from 0 and 25 and 25 to 50 being the top, to 50 to 75 and 75 to 100 being the top, right? So those would be a couple of questions. And then going to the next slide, I know there was an interest in having some discussion around, so what are some of the domestic violence dynamics that might occur? And so Krista, I'll toss it back to you so you can include.
Thank you. And we have Sharon here, who is one of the domestic violence specialists that we're able to utilize, who's willing to very graciously offer some of her expertise right now, so we can be keeping some of those really important factors in mind.
Yeah, great, Sharon. Thanks.
Are you able to unmute, Sharon?
Yes, I am. Hi, thanks everyone.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so Krista and I have had some discussions. Just a reminder that there may be increased safety concerns when you're thinking about expanding networks for families where domestic violence is a concern. And each district, has domestic violence specialists that are certainly available to consult in much the same way that we do around family safety planning or any other process where other individuals might be coming through. For me, it's really about, I think, partnering with the survivor parent first to really get an idea of, are there dynamics that could raise safety concerns? From the most extreme being that mom is sort of fleeing or in hiding from an abusive partner. And so then we need to be planning about how we would proceed safely about any inclusion. But there can also be a number of dynamics, right? Where men who abuse their partners may have also been fairly abusive, aggressive, or hostile towards other females in their family of origin. So paternal grandmothers a lot will talk about not feeling like they can confront or hold abusive sons accountable when they're adults. Family members also can become targets of abusive fathers or abusive parents. So just conversations about how are we addressing that? How are we supporting these family network people? How are we keeping them safe? There's just a number of different dynamics that can really occur with DV. And our policy within DCF in working domestic violence cases is really one of the cornerstones is that partnering with the survivor parent. So making sure before, sort of that process gets away from us, that we might need to slow down and make sure we're talking to them about the ramifications of how we do that safely.
Any other tips, Sharon, that you'd want to convey?
No, I was just thinking that I like the circles of supports with survivor parents. I think is one of the ones that I really think starts that conversation out great, because it can help her identify with you, why aren't they in a closer circle, right? Because her abusive partners threatened them that if they're involved that they'll be in danger, so they're on the outside and she hasn't shared it, or is it because he's isolated her and she's just sort of lost track of them over time, that sort of thing. So I like that tool the best, honestly, for domestic violence victims.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of assessment ideas around folks that have been in violent relationships with partners is how isolated are they? And it's partly, as you talked about, whether there's shame in sharing it or there's intimidation of other folks. And by nature, the isolation creates a greater likelihood of victimization or of trouble within the family in terms of parent rearing. And that's the point, child rearing. And that's the point of the networks. It's like, how do we construct networks that build resilience and support and sometimes assist in the boundary development when those sorts of things are necessary. And so I think those are really important aspects of the work that you do. Is part of your assessment is, what's the extent that the parents have networks of support, and including the offending parent, do they have people that they can reach out to when they're struggling so they can have alternatives to behavior that they're already demonstrating, and that those kinds of networks can really help. I mean, if any kind of social problem or personal problem that we're having, the more isolated we are, the more likely we get sucked into it, and it's harder to separate the problem from the person, and which is a really important aspect of the work that we do. So any final thoughts, Sharon?
No, I think you worded that just right. I mean, I think that our ultimate goal would definitely be sort of a support and accountability circle for any partners who are using violence against their intimate partners. But sometimes it's a slower process to get there.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's that individual assessment. Every situation is different. And then how do we stay grounded in making that assessment and not going one way or another based upon our own values, our own experience, our own history, that kind of stuff. And that's some of the most challenging work that we do, because we all have reactions to it. And then there's managing our reactions. So yeah. All right, so here's the list of the specialists that you all probably know, but it's a reminder. We wanted to put it in the PowerPoint so folks know what to do when it's like there's something that's in their head about, I don't know about this. There's people you talk to, right? It's a network. Okay.
Really quickly, there were a few reactions in the chat because
Okay.
statistically
Go for it.
speaking, very often it's a male abuser towards a female recipient of that abuse, that he and she are commonly used in that way. But there was an ask to make sure that we acknowledge that sometimes, even though statistically speaking, it might be dominantly one group, that DV survivors are men and dads, and they're not always just women. And then another point was added on that men and non-binary victims do also exist. There's just lower reporting as well. So just wanted to acknowledge.
Absolutely. And, and then there's female partner violence. There's all kinds of, I mean, that there's the traditional, and then there's what we have learned, and then there's what we don't know. Right. And so we often use the gender pronouns or the gender descriptions as ways to, because, I mean, certainly from statistical sense, that's where you first look, or that's what we're predominantly sort of experience, but that doesn't mean to rule out any of those sorts of things. So I think it's always good to remind folks that don't just assume that it follows a traditional path, because we know too much now. So thanks for jumping in there, Krista. So it's almost the top of the hour. I'm just going to show you these remaining slides, and you will get Krista, they're all going to get a copy of these PowerPoints, right?
Yes, we can share those.
Okay, so here's some good questions to be thinking about. Do you believe you consistently engage each person with the energy and enthusiasm that conveys that they're worthy of being known and understood, rather than here's somebody I have to talk to find something else out? Because you know what it's like when people engage with you that way. So it's a question for yourself. And again, how do you keep yourself in that place? What do you do in preparation for it? When you feel like you haven't quite met that standard, what do you do? Do you talk with somebody? Do you kind of recenter yourself? Because we're human and we're not going to hit the mark 100% of the times. And what kind of support do you need from each other to do your best around that? Because I think collectively, when you see where somebody else it isn't in a great place. Like, how do you offer that before they go out and maybe, not do their best? And then sort of the idea around the shame piece that we were looking into is, how do we lean into people's concerns and reticence about sharing information and trusting others? And what safety organized practice questions and tools do you use to address the reticence? How do you separate the person from the problems they're facing, which is an important construct? And should remember that people get distressed about the things they hold as important. If it doesn't matter to them, they don't get distressed. So the more distress they have about something, it's because there's something fundamentally important about what they're distressed about. So leaning into that and exploring that distress reveals what they value. And you can often find a way to connect about those values and to be able to address those values cooperatively in a way to move forward together. So my colleague Mike, who I was doing the presentation with yesterday at Kemp, likes to refer to this as distress as testimony. And it's just a way, it's an avenue in about what's important. So that I listed a bunch of questions in a breakout session. Again, we won't have time to spend time on this, but I encourage you in your offices with your colleagues, think about it, talk about it, and get some feedback with each other, and identify and build with each other about what you can do to further your practice. And then one of the things that I'll ask you to do as we kind of close, and you don't have to type anything or chat anything, but just if you can identify a couple of things from any of this list that we've talked about or discussed that you're going to try by next week. For those of you that are doing direct practice, if you're supervising direct practice, you can suggest to your workers to try and build your engagement toolkit, because I'll check in about that as we start next week. Like, what's a couple of things you can try, or even just one that you can do by next Friday. It usually is next Tuesday, but we're not meeting the Friday, so let's do it by next Friday. Small test of change, right? All right, then that's the top of the hour. These things go by so fast. Love to have spent a little bit more time in a breakout, but oh well. Say la vie. Krista, thoughts?
No, that was great. So next week we'll be meeting on Friday again at the same time, 1 to 2, to dive into, once you have all of those family members connected and engaged, having that meeting and what that meeting can look like. So great. So we will have this recording available, and we will also have the PowerPoint made available if you want to reference these at a later point.
Absolutely. And if it turns out that other tools or pieces of information will be helpful, we can share those through the network too. So if you get an idea about, boy, it'd be good to see, can you send me something about whatever, then Krista can communicate with me and I can make sure that we're providing it to you.
Great.
All right. Happy weekend. Take care. Go have some fun, huh? I see there's sun behind Tanya, so that's good.